B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Tuesday, September 1st, 2020. Happy birthday to my good friend Nancy Walton out in Missoula, Montana. And by the way, your humble host is going to take a long Labor Day weekend. I'll be gone from Thursday, returning next Tuesday, which will be September the 8th. So, a story that is probably not going to get a lot of attention in other media today is one that is important to me. My friend Sue Wilson at the Media Action Center has alerted us to a filing with the Federal Communications Commission, and it refers to Sinclair Broadcasting. Now, if Sinclair operates in your city, there's a good chance that they own multiple television stations. And some of those stations are nominally owned by straw operators. And, for example, in Baltimore, where Sinclair is headquartered and where they produce much of the cookie-cutter programming that is pushed out nationally, centrally, to its owned stations all across the country. Nominally, Sinclair owns WBFF, and a separate company, Cunningham Broadcasting, owns WNUV. And a third company, Deerfield Media, owns WUTB. But it turns out that in filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission, Sinclair admitted that it actually has controlling interest in the other two stations that are nominally owned by other companies. But they've told the FCC that, these are completely independent owners. They just happen to be tight with the people who operate Sinclair. So Baltimore has a total of 7 television stations, and the FCC rules, watered down as they are, Bill Clinton signed the 1996 Telecom Act that enhanced this consolidation and expansion of duopolies and monopolies. But the current rule says that one TV company cannot reach more than 39% of the viewers in a single market. And they may only own 2 stations if there are 8 or more stations in that market. So Baltimore only has 7. That means Sinclair legally can only claim ownership of 1. And the crucial part here is that the only time that the FCC has stripped licenses from a group owner was in the case of a company called RKO. And back in the 60s and 70s, RKO was a dominant radio station owner with stations in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Memphis, let me think where else. They had a big footprint across the country. And they were owned by RKO General, and that came out of the old RKO company, which had newsreels in the 1930s. And the General stood for General Tire. And General Tire was exposed for paying bribes to do business outside the United States. And that's not what caused the FCC to deny them license renewals. It's because RKO lied to the FCC. The polite legalese is they showed a distinct lack of candor. Well, it appears that Sinclair has been caught red-handed in a lack of candor. And this is important because Sinclair is kind of off the radar for most people who live in big cities, and it is a huge propaganda operation that uses its local news reports to feed propaganda about the Trump administration and right-wing viewpoints to its television viewers. Some of the stations have network franchises, so you might not know it's a Sinclair station because it runs NBC or CBS or Fox entertainment programming in prime time. But when you look at their news reports, their newscasts, you'll see, for example, a daily commentary by Sebastian Gorka. You remember him? He's the far-right former Trump administration advisor. And he is the key commentator on Sinclair stations in 89 cities across the country. And those stations must carry his nightly commentary, in which he often serves up the talking points of Donald J. Trump in his latest tweets. And that's not all. Media critics have demonstrated, using clever video editing, that the news anchors on Sinclair stations are often handed scripts that they are required to read verbatim, that is, word for word. And these often are biased or colored to reflect the corporate point of view. And my other objection to Sinclair is that they are an incredibly cheap operation. They feed weather forecasts from a warehouse in Baltimore to stations all across the country. And they do a lot of other things that keep wages down for the lucky people who work there. And I have put a link to the Sinclair official website. Oh, it's loaded with spin about the company. But if you're at all curious, follow the link, and it lands on a homepage, and when you scroll down, there is a map of the United States that depicts all of the cities where Sinclair operates. And, for example, I discovered that they own or control 8 stations in Bakersfield, 8 in Chico, Redding here in California, 10 channels in Eureka. Now, some of those are repeaters, or so-called translators that help get a signal into remote areas. In Eugene, Oregon, Sinclair controls 18 licenses. So this is a clear and present danger to independent media and independent reporting in this country. And the lawyer who has filed this petition with the FCC, Arthur Belendiuk, said, Sinclair told the FCC one thing and told the SEC something else. So the FCC must set this matter for a public hearing. The rules are the rules, and if Sinclair is violating the rules by controlling more TV stations than it is legally entitled to do, the FCC must put a stop to it. Now, when Sinclair attempted to buy the Tribune television stations, and I believe ultimately the FCC did not approve that whole deal, there were other filings with the Commission that, if they are dug out and investigated, could show additional lack of candor. And so I encourage you, if you're at all interested, to contact your member of Congress and ask him or her to put pressure on the FCC to follow its own rules. It's captive to a Republican appointee who's loyal to Trump. They bent over backwards to bend the rules to allow Sinclair to buy the Tribune Company's stations. And chances are they'll try to do that again. But it is a long shot, but it's certainly worth a try to see if Sinclair could be declared unfit as an FCC licensee. So, as expected, Trump carried out his threat to go on his peace mission to Kenosha, Wisconsin, to talk up his law and order campaign points, to divide people, the armed white folks from the unarmed black folks. And, of course, he is all over the map. Yesterday, he declined to denounce the accused 17-year-old white gunman who's charged with killing 2 people last week. And Kenosha is locked down with helicopters buzzing overhead, a heavy presence of armored vehicles, Streets were closed. The commuter trains to Chicago were halted for the day. And the one family that Trump, he dodged the questions, but he is not likely to visit with, is the family of Jacob Blake, the black man who was shot 7 times in the back. And even Trump acknowledges that the video that he saw doesn't look good. But he's not going to allow that to get in the way of his scheme to divide Americans. So his comments on Monday about the alleged young gunman came amid a series of developments that undercut his law and order campaign message and left his aides straining to defend the president's public behavior. His apparent sympathy for a teenager charged with murder who was not legally entitled to carry what we believe was an AR-15 openly on the streets of Kenosha. And Trump continued to attack radical left mayors and governors. And just in 15 minutes that I listened to Rush Limbaugh on the way to the secret studio this morning, he referred to radical left Democrats at least 10 times. And it's laughable. Except that with the backing of networks like Sinclair and Fox and One America News, there are many people who have pictures on their TV screens every night showing the violence and mayhem and the anti-fascist people who they believe are a threat to life as we know it, when in fact crime overall is down. And in my view, it is the police who often provoke the violence that we see. So Governor Tony Evers, who had asked Trump to delay his visit, called a special session in Madison, the state capital, on Monday to address police reform. But the Republicans who control majorities in both houses, they just declined to participate. So no debates or votes took place. Then there's this weird interview that Trump did with Laura Ingraham on Fox last night. And he gave us some more crazy talk. At one point of the interview, Ingraham asked Trump who's behind Biden's campaign. And he said, people that you've never heard of, people that are in the dark shadows. And even Ingraham seemed to be aghast. She said, that sounds like a conspiracy theory. Trump rambled on. There are people that are on the streets. There are people that are controlling the streets. We had somebody get on a plane from a certain city this weekend, and in the plane it was almost completely loaded with thugs wearing these dark uniforms, black uniforms with gear and this and that. There were a lot of people who were on the plane to do big damage. Now, he didn't say where the plane took off from or where it landed. And the description could be some of his palace guard. The federal marshals and the people from the Bureau of Prisons and the border guards who were sent to Portland. They were sent to Seattle but didn't actually emerge there. And so it's not clear who he's talking about or even the time frame when this allegedly happened. And he told Ingraham, after providing no evidence for his claims, and she pressed him, I'll tell you sometime. Then he told reporters today, just before he got on Air Force One bound for Kenosha, I could tell you that I can probably refer you to the person and they could do it. I would like to ask that person if it was okay. The person on the plane said there were about 6 people like that person or more or less, and what happened is the entire plane filled up with the looters, the anarchists, rioters, people looking for trouble. The person felt very uncomfortable on the plane. It is a person you know. I'll see whether or not I can get that person to speak to you. What? I mean, now it's down to 6 people. Just in the quote to Ingraham, it was virtually the entire plane. And as somebody who likes to wear black, I usually wear black jeans. And it's easy to match when you wear a black T-shirt. The fact that you wear black doesn't make you an anarchist or an anti-fascist or even a goon from the federal government. But then Trump went on to talk about his empathy for the police officer accused, well, he's not accused. We know who he is and we know what he did. He's the one who shot Jacob Blake 7 times in the back. So this is Trump referring to that incident. Shooting the guy in the back many times? I mean, couldn't you have done something different? Couldn't you have wrestled him? In the meantime, he might have been going for a weapon. There's a whole big thing there. But they choke. Just like in a golf tournament. They miss a 3-foot putt. What? And even Ingram couldn't believe what he was saying. You're not comparing it to golf, she said. Because, of course, that's what the media will say, as if she's not part of the media. I'm saying people choke, Trump continued. You've got a quarter of a second to make a decision. If you don't make the decision and you're wrong, you're dead. Okay. The stable genius is going off the charts. And, of course, he is so full of himself, his narcissism, the overcompensation for his personal insecurities that makes him believe that he's always right and that all of the sycophants around him nod their heads like bobbleheads. And so he lives in this bubble where he believes his own bullshit because the people around him don't challenge it. And now Trump is taking credit for peace on the streets of Kenosha. He said, "This ended within an hour, and as soon as we announced we were coming, and then they saw we were here." Well, he is claiming that the federal marshals that he sent to Kenosha, who arrived there last Wednesday or Thursday, brought peace to the town. But he always recommends the National Guard. And Governor Tony Evers of Wisconsin deployed the National Guard, first 150, then 500, and then 1,000. But Trump didn't make that decision. And the announcement that he was going to Kenosha didn't occur until Sunday. And there was a peaceful march led by Mr. Jacob Sr., Mr. Blake Sr., on Saturday. So this is deeply troubling. It's confounding. And who knows what will happen when Trump leaves Kenosha? Will peace remain? Will the armed white militia types be on the streets side by side with the cops and the National Guard? And will Black Lives Matter protesters challenge the authoritarian show? And I don't believe that Trump contributes anything except more disruption. And I am reminded of the infamous malaprop of the original Mayor Daley, Richard J. Daley, the boss of Chicago, after the riots erupted at the 1968 Democratic Convention. They were mostly police riots. And I used to have a recording of Mayor Daley, who infamously said, "The police are here to preserve disorder." Now, another comment from Trump is that he has denied an unsubstantiated claim that he had been taken to Walter Reed Medical Center last fall after suffering a series of mini strokes. Now, some of this originated from the new book by Michael Schmidt, a New York Times reporter, and it was amplified in a big book launch party on the Rachel Maddow show last night. She spent almost 40 minutes of her hour-long show either promoting Schmidt's book or interviewing him about it. And one of the things they speculated about was, apparently Schmidt discovered that Trump did make a secret visit to Walter Reed on a Saturday afternoon last November. Beyond that, I don't have any information, and Trump is denying this speculation that it was some sort of a mini stroke. I mean, I consider this to be careless reporting on the part of Schmidt and Maddow. And it only opens them up to the attacks of fake news, which reliably came across the Twitter this morning. There are also people who are in my news feed at Facebook with a video clip of when Trump went to New Hampshire and gave an airport speech last Friday night, that he stumbled a little bit on the steps, the risers, up to the stage from which he spoke. And it's like the West Point incident, where people take video and selectively interpret it to fit some theory that they have. And again, I feel that this only feeds Trump's belief that the media is against him. They'll lie and report anything to make him look bad. And in these cases, unfortunately, I have to concede he's got a point. So we're getting further examination of last weekend's street clashes in Portland, Oregon, where hundreds of people who identify as members of Patriot Prayer and their supporters staged a caravan. And the New York Times has put together a timeline of the events that led up to the shooting and death of Aaron Danielson, known as Jay Danielson, a 39-year-old member of Patriot Prayer. So it's interesting because the Times says that the event was originally called Trump 2020 Cruise Rally, and the route that they had planned did not take them to downtown Portland. But a number of vehicles peeled off from the group and went downtown seeking confrontation. And a guy who was described as being a companion of Mr. Danielson, Chandler Pappas, had a paintball gun, and the two men were armed with knives. So, in multiple videos posted to Twitter, members of this Patriot Prayer caravan can be seen firing pepper spray and paintballs at the protesters. So while I'm sure the protesters were yelling at them and flipping the bird and giving them a thumbs down, it appears that the first physical exchanges were initiated by the Patriot Prayer group. One confrontation filmed by a journalist, Corey Elia, shows a tall man dressed in white and wearing a multi-pocketed vest. He is believed to be the shooter in this case, and we'll talk about him a little bit more in a moment. The live stream video shows the man in white walking by himself toward the Justice Center and crossing the street a block south. 1 minute and 43 seconds later, another volunteer video shooter, who we talked about yesterday, his name is Dunlap, Justin Dunlap, he turns his camera toward the sound of the shooting. The man in white and another man dressed in black can be seen crossing the street, apparently to confront Jay Danielson. And there is shouting that is hard to hear on one stream, but on the second video, a man who Pappas later contended is the gunman shouts, "Hey, we got some right here. We got a couple right here." Another man says, "He's macing you. He's pulling it out." The sound of spraying of the mace is audible, followed immediately by 2 gunshots. Danielson, the victim, can be seen raising his arm, beginning to spray a pepper spray-like substance, followed immediately by the gunshots. The man in white backs away and then runs along with his Confederate, the man dressed in black. But Pappas said that he and Danielson had not had any prior confrontations with those two men who he says he didn't recognize. So, as we mentioned yesterday, the suspect in the case is a man named Michael Renault. He's 48 years old. Family members who saw him on TV have confirmed his identification. And so far, there have been no arrests, and so we have to conclude that Renault is still at large. But he was the one described as dressed in white, showing him at the scene of the deadly shooting about 9 p.m. on Saturday night. So Renault is also visible in videos that were shot the night before in the lobby of the condo tower where the mayor of Portland, Ted Wheeler, lives. And in a moment, we'll describe the activity there at his condo location last night. So one protest participant helping to direct traffic said he noticed Renault, who wasn't wearing a mask. He showed up with his daughter, who carried a baseball bat, and she appears to be a young to mid-teenager. Renault calls himself an anti-fascist. He wrote in mid-June on Instagram, "I am 100% Antifa all the way. I am willing to fight for my brothers and sisters." And on July 27th, he posted, "I have my daughter here with me because I'm trying to give her an education." Well, I guess we can suspect that the homeschooling continued into Saturday night. And Renault also was accused of carrying a loaded gun at an earlier protest in Portland on July 5th. He was cited at 2 a.m, accused of illegally possessing a loaded gun in a public place. So I reported to you yesterday that the governor of Oregon, Governor Kate Brown, had ordered state troopers back into Portland to augment the Portland police. And she also put out a request to the sheriffs in neighboring counties to provide personnel to join the Portland police and the state troopers on the streets of Portland. But the sheriffs of those counties, Washington and Clackamas counties, have arrogantly refused. And they're not saying that it's because they don't have the manpower or they don't believe in mutual aid. They're basically saying that their feelings were hurt by criticism of police operations. Here's Sheriff Pat Garrett, without Billy the Kid, of Washington County. "The lack of political support for public safety, the uncertain legal landscape, the current volatility combined with intense scrutiny on use of force presents an unacceptable risk if deputies were deployed directly." So he's saying if he has to observe the rules of Portland, he won't come to play. And this is a huge dereliction of duty. And it exposes one of the big problems we have in virtually every state in this country, that the sheriffs are directly elected and they are unaccountable to anyone. And a bit later, we're going to talk about the rogue sheriff of Los Angeles, Alex Villanueva, where there was another police killing of a black man just yesterday. So this puts Governor Brown in a pickle, because at the same time she is trying to pacify the protesters, she is deploying more police to the streets of Portland. She's talked about hosting a community forum on racism and police use of force. And some of this is because of the pressure from Trump. She's got to do something, or he'll send more of his palace guard out onto the streets of Portland. And I'm sure she knows that this will not defuse the protests, which marked 96 nights in a row yesterday. And police in Portland claim that they don't have the bandwidth to intervene in the clashes between right-wing groups and counter-protesters. Sounds like bullshit to me. Just an excuse about why they haven't even tried. And what we saw last Saturday in the daylight hours was police giving a pass to the Patriot Prayer types as they were reining in the Black Lives Matter protesters. And I want to share with you an email that came in yesterday, but I didn't notice it till last night, from a loyal listener and subscriber, Jerry, who is in southeast Portland. Peter B., I wanted to tell you about my experience getting caught in the middle of the Trump rally Saturday afternoon. My family and I were returning home from just outside Portland, and as we entered the city on the freeway, there were hundreds and hundreds of trucks with huge Trump, Blue Lives Matter, and Confederate flags all over them. I had been unaware of the rally ahead of time, and at first was just kind of bemused and disgusted by the overt display. But as we exited the freeway onto a well-used byway, it too was overrun by these zealots, and it became apparent that these assholes were itching for trouble. Many of them were antagonizing other drivers by revving their motors, honking nonstop, doing sudden lane changes, and actively running red lights at high rates of speed. We thought a pedestrian was going to get hit at one of those intersections. We witnessed some dudes openly drinking and brandishing paintball guns and nonstop yelling. It was beyond disconcerting and has left me shaken. My family and I, along with all the rest of the non-Trumpers, were merely driving home or on errands and are just people. The fact that they feel compelled or are given the right to terrorize normal citizens has me worried about the next few weeks leading up to the election night, and the time till January, and probably for the foreseeable future. A peaceful transition of power is hard to imagine at this point. The vast majority of Portland neighborhoods feel perfectly normal for a pandemic. But as these outside agitators grow in numbers, each weekend that too may change. It is also becoming more difficult to comfort my two teenagers when the ugly face of fascism was literally right in front of us and next to us and behind us. Jerry, I really appreciate your eyewitness account of the scene in Portland. Monday night, once again, that was night 96 of protest on the streets, and according to the Oregonian newspaper, there were about 200 people who took up a position outside the condo tower where Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler lives. And it happened to be the mayor's birthday, so they were serenading him with "Happy Tear Gas to You." And some people lit a bundle of newspapers on fire and tossed them into a storefront of the residential building. That was about 11 p.m. Once again, based on this account, it appears that the police declaration of a riot was overkill, an overreaction. And calls for the resignation of Mayor Wheeler continue to be heard in Portland. This is the second time that they have occupied the lobby of his building and set up a protest there. 19 people were arrested last night. An Oregon public broadcasting reporter captured video of police officers, a single officer, throwing a person to the ground and then striking the person repeatedly before other cops caught up and took the person into custody. So the Portland police tweeted a warning to journalists and legal observers not to interfere with police conduct. There's been a court order that was suspended, and it basically removed the protections from legal observers and those who claim to be press. And some of the people who have press tags appear to be freelancers or just self-styled media operators, and I don't object to that. But I think the police make a distinction between official media and independent or self-styled media. So it is a tough situation there in Portland, and we will continue to watch it here at the Peter B. Collins podcast. But the story I referenced a few minutes ago from Los Angeles on Monday, this came from the rogue sheriff's department. 2 deputies shot and killed a black man, and this was after a traffic stop of a man who was riding a bicycle. Now, I can't imagine what he did that caused the officers to pull him over. But 29-year-old Dijon Kizzy hopped off his bike, ran away from the cops who were attempting to stop him, and he carried a bundle, clothing or something like that. And at a certain point, the deputies caught up with him, and he smacked one of them in the face. But in the process, he dropped that bundle, and a pistol fell out. And at that point, the cops started firing, and they just put him away, at least 10 shots. Now, he did not possess the weapon. He didn't have control of it. It fell out. And the idea that they had to kill him over that, claiming that he was some sort of imminent danger to the officers, is just unbelievable and inexcusable. Now the sheriff has released limited information. The spokesperson said he didn't know which vehicle codes the man on the bike allegedly broke. So this is going to be another flashpoint, another spark for protesters who have legitimate questions. And this same department, just a few weeks back, shot another. This was a Latino man who was a security guard at a body shop. He did run when the police approached, but they killed him without any real imminent danger or other threat being posed. And this one I hadn't heard about before, but over the weekend, an African-American police officer on the St. Louis police force was shot and killed, and his other police colleague was wounded by a white man. We don't have a lot of details on this incident. The second officer was shot in the leg, is expected to survive, but the officer who died, 29-year-old Tamaris Bohannon, well, he was shot by a white man, and that's about all I know. And I haven't heard Trump, who did dispatch 50 of his agents in early August to St. Louis after 6 other police officers were shot. This is the only fatality from the cops who were on the receiving end of violence. But why is it when the shooter is white and the victim is a black police officer that Trump doesn't have any interest? Every day I like to stop for a second and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like Paul Tomaselli, Eric Thomas, Elizabeth Vasquez, and Doug Cooper. They each chip in $5 a month, and you can do it too. All you have to do is slide over to peterbcollins.com/sign up. You can also make a contribution of any amount just by going through the PayPal link there. Well, I'm trying to update you on what happened in Sacramento yesterday, the final day of the legislative session. And the good news is that they did provide some relief to prevent 4 million Californians from being evicted because they can't pay the damn rent. And it's a compromise bill that requires people to pay 25% of the monthly rent. And the balance is not being forgiven, it's just being deferred. And I haven't seen the language of the final bill, but what was under discussion was that the amount of money owed to a landlord would be treated as civil debt, and that the renters would ultimately have to pay it back. But the legislation that the governor signed on an emergency basis, and it went into effect immediately, says tenants don't have to immediately repay the rent they missed between March and August. They have to pay 25% of their rent from September 1st through January 31st to be protected from eviction. Landlords will be able to sue tenants in civil court to obtain unpaid rent. And as of February 1st, all of this expires, and tenants are once again vulnerable to eviction. If they can't pay the 25%, they can be evicted on or after February 1st. So it's clearly not perfect, but it is some protection. And when we look at what the legislature didn't accomplish, even when you have Democratic majorities in both houses of the legislature and a Democratic governor, the forces arrayed against police reform are extremely powerful. So there were a lot of grand proposals offered, but most of them have been killed in committee or voted down on the floor. And one of them is a bill that I strongly support, and I've linked to an article from the Davis Vanguard. That is a great media outlet. They print a weekly paper, but they're very active online. And social justice and criminal justice reform are at the top of the agenda of the Davis Vanguard. And they profile Senate Bill 731, which did not pass by the end of the session. But the proposal was that police officers must be licensed like other professionals, lawyers, doctors, nurses, cosmetologists. And in my view, I've argued this before, this takes the discipline of rogue police officers into a new arena. Because if they are licensed professionals, in order to hold on to their licenses, they've got to operate within the law. And they also need to carry liability insurance that all professionals carry. And my argument is that the insurance carriers would not renew the policies of bad cops, or they would jack up the rates so high that it's not cost effective for a cop to continue in a field where he's been identified as, shall we say, less than qualified. So I support this effort. I hope they will reintroduce it in the new year, in the next session. But one of the issues that I referenced earlier in relation to Alex Villanueva and the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department is that sheriffs are above any kind of oversight. And an assembly member whose name is Kevin McCarty, he's from the Sacramento area, he got assembly passage of Bill 1185, which clarifies how county boards of supervisors can create oversight commissions for sheriffs. And it gives subpoena power to those boards because in both Sacramento, where Scott Jones got a critical report from an inspector general, he fired the inspector general and just dismissed the report. And Villanueva in Los Angeles is way out of control. And while he is often criticized by members of the city council and the board of supervisors there, it don't matter because the sheriffs are truly independent, and too much so. We also have a case that is getting more serious. The sheriff of Santa Clara County, that's where San Jose is the county seat, Laurie Smith, who I helped get elected more than 20 years ago. We produced a campaign video that was pretty effective in her victory. Well, one of the people just pled guilty in a case where she is accused of trading concealed weapons permits to people who made big donations to her campaign fund. And as I say, a principal in that investigation surprised people by taking a guilty plea yesterday. Legislators did ban the use of some neck restraints, including chokeholds. AB 1196 was passed with bipartisan support. A measure creating strict rules about when and how law enforcement could use non-lethal projectiles like rubber bullets has stalled. Measures that died earlier in the session included one that would have mandated that officers intervene if a fellow officer used excessive force. That's the bad apples being turned in by the good apples. And so there are also plans to try to help average Californians, to try to rescue the economy, to try to have the state fund the $600 a week increment to unemployment benefits. There was a pretty novel $25 billion plan to use tax vouchers and renter eviction relief. That died. And so what we see here, pure and simple, is that the campaign finance system is what really controls the legislative process, and that the donors can determine what survives and what doesn't. But let me end on a better note, referring to the California legislative session, because one of the things that we discussed a couple of weeks ago in our in-depth interview with Steve Horn is that California has relied on prisoners who volunteer to fight fires. But many of those prisoners were released early in relation to the pandemic in the prisons. And another thing that Horn highlighted is that firefighters who complete their sentences are barred from joining a fire department because the law prevents people with a felony record from being a licensed EMT operator, and that is the fundamental for a firefighter or an ambulance technician. And so a bill sponsored by Assemblywoman Eloise Gomez of San Bernardino will allow people who have trained at state fire camps in prison to have their criminal records more quickly expunged and qualify for work in that field. I think that's progress, but it's pretty weak. A pretty weak session in Sacramento this year. Now to our daily COVID-19 update prepared by Linda Lewis. Worldwide, the number of confirmed cases is at 25.5 million. The total deaths, 851,000. Here in the United States, the cases that are confirmed are over 6 million, and the official death total is at 183,000. The National Academy of Sciences has issued recommendations, a draft report, on how to prioritize distribution of a COVID-19 vaccine, should we get one. The report suggests a first round of vaccines start with healthcare workers in high-risk settings, followed by adults of any age who have medical conditions that put them at significantly higher risk of having severe disease. Most of the vaccines under development will require 2 doses per person, a priming dose followed by a booster either 3 or 4 weeks later. And this underscores that, the testing, evaluation of the vaccine can't be done overnight. Even if you got 30,000 people to roll up their sleeves and take a dose, they need a follow-up dose 3 or 4 weeks later. Then somebody's got to evaluate all that data before any approvals are given. So it does appear the FDA is ready to bend the rules or break them in order to avoid dangerous tweets from the president. So the recommendation continues. A second phase of vaccinations should involve critical risk workers, people in industries essential to the functioning of society, as well as teachers and school staff, people with underlying health problems of all ages, all older adults not vaccinated in the first phase. And then the third phase would be young adults, children, and workers in essential industries. Now, I'm glad to see some advanced planning here. They didn't have adequate supplies of PPE, and in many cases we still don't. There's no national coordination of the response to the pandemic that's meaningful in any way. So this is a nice shift, but it presumes that there is a vaccine. So AstraZeneca announced today, actually yesterday, its vaccine candidate has entered final testing in the United States. The British-based company said the study will involve about 30,000 adults from various racial, ethnic, and geographic groups. And AstraZeneca said their vaccine, known as AZD1222, is moving ahead globally with late-stage trials in the UK, Brazil, and South Africa. There are additional trials planned in Japan and Russia. Oxford University and AstraZeneca are making what scientists call a viral vector vaccine. A good analogy is the Trojan horse. The shots are made with a harmless virus, a cold virus that normally infects chimpanzees, that carry the spike protein's genetic material into the body. Once again, the body produces some spike protein and primes the immune system, but it, too, is a fairly new technology. There are two other vaccine candidates, one coming from Moderna, and that's the one that Dr. Fauci has touted. The other is developed by Pfizer and the German company BioNTech or BioNTech. The Moderna and Pfizer candidates began Phase 3 testing in late July. Neither uses the actual coronavirus. Instead, they've made it with the genetic code for the aptly named spike protein that coats the surface of the coronavirus. You inject the vaccine containing that code called mRNA, and the body's cells will make some harmless spike protein. Most of the leading candidates are being tested with 2 doses, as we alluded to a minute ago. New information which contradicts Trump's tweets or retweets that falsely claim that COVID-19 deaths are not as high as previously thought. The Post claimed that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention updated its COVID-19 death numbers to show that only 9,200 Americans have died from the disease. But what they're referring to is that COVID was listed along with other causes for the deaths of people, and so that is being parsed as not a COVID death because there were other conditions present. So the National Center for Health Statistics uses this example, courtesy of Jeff Lancashire, the acting associate director for communications. He said that while 94% of death certificates that mention COVID-19 also list other conditions, the underlying cause of death was COVID-19 in almost all of them. And a doctor explains, let's say someone was admitted to the hospital because of symptoms of COVID. They test positive, so COVID would be listed. Their case progressed where they developed respiratory failure and now are on a ventilator. Respiratory failure can be listed. Additional conditions may be listed on a patient's death certificate during the course of their stay in the hospital. If a COVID-19 patient ended up dying from cardiac arrest, that could also be included. So this just serves to underscore a point I've been making, that the data are highly unreliable because the terms that relate to the numbers collected are not consistent from one place to the next. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin is testifying before a House subcommittee overseeing the response to the coronavirus pandemic after a report by the committee's Democratic majority found that thousands of loans to small businesses under the Paycheck Protection Program were vulnerable to potential fraud or abuse. Republicans on the subcommittee, though, released their own report saying everything is hunky-dory. And we have some examples here. The analysis identified 10,800 loans which were granted to borrowers receiving more than one loan, totaling over $1 billion. And of those, only 65 would be subject to additional scrutiny. It also identifies more than 600 loans totaling over $96 million that went to companies that are forbidden from doing business with the federal government. And what about the billions that the Catholic Church pulled out? Even though they don't pay taxes, they were happy to take federal money. Here's a separate report in the New York Times today. People of color have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19, and the children of color are infected at higher rates than white children and hospitalized at rates 5 to 8 times of white children. Of more than 180,000 Americans who've died of COVID-19, fewer than 100 are children. But children of color make up a majority of these kids. So the deaths include 41 Hispanic, 24 black, 19 white, 3 Asian American children, 3 American of Indian and Alaskan Native heritage, and 2 multiracial children. Professor of pediatrics at Stanford, Dr. Yvonne Maldonado, is quoted, "I know exactly what's happening to those kids. Their parents are frontline, blue-collar, or essential workers." Well, I think this is a reflection of the fear of Trump. But donors to the Biden-Harris campaign chipped in over $300 million in August. It sets a new record. Barack Obama held the previous record at $193 million back in 2008 in September. And get this, a majority of Biden's August total came from online grassroots donors. But there are provisions that allow wealthy people to donate as much as $700,000 to an array of committees supporting the same candidate. And Joe Biden, in my view, really blundered yesterday when he went to Pittsburgh to push back against Trump and his division, the violence that he's stoking. I thought that's one of the better speeches that Biden has given. But he went on to say that Trump is lying when he says that Biden is going to ban fracking. Now, Biden has created this very carefully calibrated position that he doesn't support new fracking on federal land. But most of the fracking sites are on privately held turf. Here's the quote from Joe. "I am not banning fracking. Let me say that again. I'm not banning fracking no matter how many times Donald Trump lies about me." Well, in this case, it shows that Trump is using a very effective tactic to press Joe Biden to denounce the violence of protesters, to say that he's not in favor of fracking. All these other positions where Biden has at least paid lip service to a tilt to the Bernie Sanders wing of the party. And Trump is systematically forcing him to repudiate those. So there's some legal skirmishes underway about your ability to vote by mail in November. In Texas, the Republican Attorney General filed a lawsuit to stop the chief election official in Harris County, that's Houston, from sending applications to vote by mail to 2 million voters. The filing said the mailing would create confusion and encourage fraud. They'll say anything. They really will. So, in Iowa, national Democrats sued to overturn an order by the Republican Secretary of State that bars county clerks from sending voters absentee ballots that have been pre-filled. Like your name and your address is already printed there. But Iowa's Secretary of State has said that only blank applications are valid. Republicans say that making voters fill in those missing details is an important security measure. In Georgia, a federal district judge sided with national Democrats, ordered an extension of the deadline when absentee ballots must be received. The current rules invalidate any ballot that is received after the 7 o'clock closing time on Election Day. The ruling extends that to 7 p.m. on the third day after Election Day. But will that be enough for the partly destroyed Postal Service to get your ballot there on time if you wait until Election Day to cast it? The Attorney General, Bill Barr, and consigliere to the President, has imposed new rules effective today, tightening the use of government surveillance on political candidates or their staffers. In a pair of memos, Barr said that before the FBI and Justice Department seek a warrant from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court to secretly monitor the communications of an elected official, a declared political candidate, or any of their staff, officials must first consider warning that person that foreign governments may be targeting with it. Well, I'll observe this, but this is an effort by Barr to prevent what happened in 2016. And I have to say that some of it is warranted, because Carter Page had already left the Trump campaign by the time the FBI first got a warrant to monitor his phones. I do expect that Bill Barr is going to pull a rabbit out of a hat between now and Election Day and expose what went on in the investigation of Trump and the campaign in 2016. Barr has also reportedly removed the head of a section of the Justice Department that deals with ensuring the legality of federal counterterrorism and counterintelligence activities. That appears to be linked to the memo that he issued. This affects the removal of Brad Weigman, a Deputy Assistant Attorney General. Comes less than 3 days after the Director of National Intelligence declared that Congress will no longer get live verbal briefings on election security. They claim there have been leaks that they can't tolerate. But while it has enraged a lot of Democrats, I'm just not so sure what the FBI and the Justice Department have to report when it comes to so-called Russian meddling. And I believe that there should be public evidence before they make a move to try to investigate a current campaign, whether it's Biden or Trump. And I saw Adam Schiff on TV the other night. He continues to stoke the Russia stuff. We don't have any actual evidence of what Russia may be doing right now, but when you see what Americans do to other Americans online, it's hard for me to believe that Russia has much of an impact. And I wanted to mention, in relation to the Michael Schmidt book and Rachel Maddow's book launch party on TV last night, that Schmidt talked at some length about how after Rod Rosenstein appointed Bob Mueller as the special counsel, he set very narrow parameters for him. And the investigation that preceded Mueller, that was being run by ordinary FBI agents, had a counterintelligence component. And Rosenstein took that potential away from Bob Mueller, but never actually followed through for a counterintelligence investigation of Trump. And that underscores what I've been saying for months, that the Mueller report was a limited hangout. It was circumscribed in what it investigated and what it reported on. And we didn't hear Schmidt or Maddow admit that aspect of it. Finally today, do you know the name Ali Soufan? He was an FBI agent. He's left the Bureau now. But back in 2002, he was sent to Afghanistan to help interrogate the suspects who'd been picked up who they thought were from al-Qaeda. And Abu Zubaydah was one of them. He's the guy who got waterboarded 100 times or more. And Soufan said he didn't believe that it was right, and that he didn't believe it worked. And when he recounted that in the publication of his book 9 years ago, called The Black Banners, Declassified, How Torture Derailed the War on Terror After 9/11, the book was heavily redacted. But his publisher, W.W. Norton, has reissued the book after it cleared a security review by the CIA, and most of the material is now unredacted. And it shows that Ali Soufan, who's not a full hero to me, but he did stand up to the CIA, the highly paid contractors, Mitchell and Jessen, who scored more than $80 million to develop the torture regimes. My only beef with Ali Soufan is that after he retired from the FBI, he went to work at Rudy Giuliani's fixer firm. And I believe he's thought better of that, and now he is a solo consultant in the national security arena. Thanks for joining me for my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it absolutely everywhere. You'll find it on YouTube. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.